are. Back for part two. Now, before the short break, we were talking about the responsibility that coaches take, and it really is, like I say, it comes out loud and clear in this document that it's not just a prescriptive, do this, do this, do this, do this, think about this, think about this. It's more, actually, I would say it's a thinking person's policy, and I like that. Now, let's talk about insurance, because even though I've got my own corporate insurance, the BDA have got insurance, everyone's insured doing this, that and the other, but the bottom line is most insurance policies now, anything to do with coronavirus, are not going to be covered. So I suppose really, once again, it's the whole situation that you recognise the risk and not carry on regardless, because that would be reckless, but you make an informed choice about whether you're prepared to continue with the known risk. But it's an interesting thing, isn't it, about we may not actually be insured to paddle in a coronavirus environment, irrespective of anything.
I think that's, yes, we've got to be very careful with this particular issue. If it's a club organised activity, I would not be suggesting to any club that they should go out without insurance cover.
Yeah.
I think what national federations, certainly the British Dragon Boat Association, and I understand other national federations are trying to do, is make sure that their insurance providers understand that the clubs are taking certain precautions which minimise the risk. And in those situations, insurance cover would still be available to the club to carry out a dragon boating activity. So, for example, in the United States mandates or stipulates a maximum of 5 paddlers in a standard boat, plus a helm. I don't know the details of any insurance policy that might cover a club in, say, Florida or Connecticut, but I would imagine that the insurance provider there would say, well, as long as you had a maximum of 5 paddlers and the helm, and you were doing X, Y, and Z in accordance with the other stipulations of the US Dragon Boat Federation, we will cover you.
Yeah.
But if you're not doing that, you're on your own.
Yeah. And
being on your own with potential litigation is a very uncomfortable place. So
absolutely. This is, like I say, the key point to this is, different insurance covers, liabilities are different in different territories and countries. But if in doubt, check. Check to see whether your activity is covered. Get your insurer's COVID statement, because they will have a statement. And if you're carrying on as normal, then you may have to modify your behaviour or just check. But that's the take-home point there. In our sort of pre-discussion, we talked about having a COVID-specific officer, and the question for me was, is that the same as the safety officer? Is it separate? Is it an integral part? And we talked about which was first amongst equals. But what's your take on the role and responsibility of the COVID officer or the COVID individual, or how would that be different to the safety officer?
So what our document recommends is that clubs appoint somebody who has club responsibility for COVID issues.
Yeah.
So somebody who is monitoring what various sports bodies are saying, what the government is saying, what the landowner is saying. Somebody who is trying to bring together through one individual into the club information about COVID or coronavirus. The club safety officer has a slightly different role and is ultimately responsible to the committee and to the club for general safety across the club's activities. But most importantly, and you and I as helms and coaches know this, and most countries are exactly the same, ultimately it is the helm who has legal responsibility in most jurisdictions for the safety of his or her craft. Absolutely. And the people on board. That's the case in most jurisdictions that I'm aware of. So the ultimate decision, the final decision as to whether it is safe to go out, should not rest with the COVID officer, the safety officer, but will rest with the helm. If that helm isn't comfortable about going out for whatever reason, then you should not go out. So I talked about first amongst equals. The COVID officer is there to provide the interface, if you like, between the club and the external environment, to understand all the restrictions, the recommendations, the issues. As club safety officer, ultimately responsible to take that information and process it on behalf of the club. And then each activity, the decision must rest with the person who is best placed to take that decision for that activity.
I mean, when I saw this was the reason for the question. This is the point I wanted to draw out, and you've really covered it quite succinctly. If you said to most people, I suspect, what would a COVID officer do? And they'd think, well, I mark out sort of squares on the ground and this and other, but it's not that. That's one part of it. It's a wider piece where they're looking at what they're doing in Singapore, looking at your document, looking at other, drawing in good ideas to implement and seeing if that plays at your particular club training location session. So it's a wider issue than just its strategic piece and the operational piece, if you like.
I would actually just slightly polish that a little bit more. It's not just about taking what Singapore might be doing or India might be doing and saying, is that applicable to our club? I think it's more the role I would see the COVID officer doing is saying, do I fully understand what the government regulations in my country are saying? Do I fully understand what the federations, the national federations requirements are in order to provide us with the requisite insurance cover?
Yeah.
Have I liaised with the landowner to make sure that, notwithstanding anything the government's saying, we're complying with the landowner's specific requirements relating to coronavirus? So I see it more as a role that isn't necessarily looking outwards for good ideas, but is actually making sure that we're compliant, a club is compliant with what is required to be done.
And that, for the benefit of certainly British paddlers, landowner includes the Canal and Rivers Trust, maybe Environment Agency, and whoever has authority, jurisdiction over your area of operation. Moving on, something that made me smile, with my sense of humour. Turn up, train, and go away. This made me laugh. It was fantastic. What made me laugh about it was I could think of some slightly antisocial individuals who've been doing that for years. But that aside, the serious point about that is we've talked about the human being, the human condition from millennia, millions of years, in fact, is we are a herd animal. So the whole idea, lots of people do dragon boating because it is a community activity. So now we're saying to people, rightly so, turn up, do your training, and then almost negate the social side of it. I mean, what was your thinking? I mean, you're quite right in my view, but what was your thought process behind that? I mean, it made me laugh, but there's a serious part to it.
Yeah, well, there is. First of all, it's not what we're saying you should do. Let's be absolutely clear. The document doesn't prescribe that. What it says is you might want to think about imposing that sort of regime.
Yeah.
And the reason the Commission worked on that was because we recognise that it's the human interactions, the contact, the physical contact and the proximity with individuals that are one of the prime transmission vectors for the coronavirus.
Yeah.
Many clubs won't, for example, allow use of communal shower areas at the moment and so on, and changing rooms for that very reason, that there's too many opportunities for somebody who potentially has come into contact with the virus to pass it on simply by touching an object that other people will then touch themselves.
Yeah.
So all we were recommending in the document is a club thinking about the idea that as far as is possible, you turn up for training dressed to train, so you don't get changed at the club. You train, and then as soon as you finish training, you clear up whatever needs to be done, whether you're going to
clear off. Clear up.
Clear up. You've got to sanitize your equipment and the boats and so on, whatever, again, you decide needs to be done, but then disperse fairly quickly.
Yeah.
Now, this does, of course, fly in the face of exactly what you said about the sport being a social and community activity. But what we're trying to recognize is that this is a lethal virus.
Yes.
and it is highly contagious. We have got to address those two issues for the benefit, not just of our club members, but for the wider community. So the turn up, train, go away was just it was to introduce a mindset that people might want to think about, that this is no longer turn up, train, have a shower, have a meal with your mates at the clubhouse and have a beer afterwards. That sadly isn't yet going to happen, certainly in Great Britain for a little while, and it may not happen in other countries for the moment.
I remember talking to, last week before, talking to John McDermott in Chicago, and he was saying when they first started getting back in boats, albeit 5 people in a steerer, a helm, they said we had to stop people sort of hugging and socialising and stuff, because that's what they want to do. That's what they come to do, and they've been doing it for years. Just changing that, like I say, changing that frame of mind rather than mindset, perhaps that behaviour. Yeah, there'll be a light at the end of the tunnel, but for right here, right now, let's get back in the boat. But let's just have those extra levels. Now, one thing that I thought was that's a downside, if you like. The upside, you're talking about recording boat layouts. I would call them paddling pods, but the same sort of thing. But of course, that occurred to me that really, that's actually a great team building instrument as well, because you're getting people, albeit socially distanced, but into closer groups, and actually it's increasing people's interdependence as well. So one thing I've found with COVID-19, coronavirus, is even though I'm socially distanced from people, I'm connected with more people through Zoom doing online training. I'm connected with people in Argentina now, Florence, everywhere. So it actually has the capacity to bring people together as well. So you shouldn't, it's not all doom and gloom, separate everybody. There are some other positive points as well. I just thought that was just one that occurred to me. It was quite a useful thing. You're creating smaller groups, smaller pods, interdependent pods, but there's a team building benefit there as well.
Moving on from that, and you're right, that was about contact tracing.
Yes.
Apart from anything else, but you're absolutely right. It does give an ability for a club to build some form of relationships amongst the paddler community that they've got. But what the document also recognises, building on your second point, is that there are lots of forms of training that you can do over video, over things like Zoom, and Skype and so on, with your club members, that even those who are, for whatever reason, socially isolating at the moment, who are perhaps in quarantine for whatever reason, could still feel part of the club community by having, for example, club physical training sessions by Zoom, having club sessions on a bit of technique. You could even demonstrate a bit of technique over a Zoom call. You could talk about the rules of racing. You could explain to club members issues relating to coronavirus and return to paddling. There's lots that can be done using electronic media that perhaps in the past we might have done at the club, physically at the club.
Just moving slightly off the subject a little bit, the vast, probably 50% of all of the coaching courses I do now, I can do online. Clearly, I need to assess somebody in person on the water, and that maybe some time. There's so much you can do. And when you're talking about one-to-one training as well, actually, you end up spending more time on a one-to-one basis with an individual. So there are some definite benefits, even though you're socially distanced. On your other point, I run a pink session, a training session on Fridays, and I've got people from Italy, UK, Philadelphia, Florida, Argentina. So exactly, there are possibilities and options there as well. But I've come off the our main discussion topic. Last few points from me. And now we talked about obviously duty of care and pitching it right. So not being too prescriptive. Now, how much is enough, and that's going to change depending on the group you're talking about. In terms of health surveillance, now obviously that's going to be a personal thing. It can depend on the paddler, depend on the athlete. But in terms of starting your risk assessment before you turn up, I know it's turn up, train, go away, but in terms of before, what sort of thing would you think is a good idea for them to be doing before they even turn up? Is there stuff they can be doing, like health surveillance? What sort of stuff do you think might be appropriate there?
I think there's a whole range of things that would be appropriate, and the para-dragon community has to think about more, potentially, than the unimpaired community. People should be asked to carry out personal or self-assessments before every training session. How do I feel? Do I feel okay? Because if I feel I've got some of the symptoms of coronavirus, is it worth taking the risk? No, it's not. It's not just me who potentially could suffer as a result. I might then potentially cause other people a lot of discomfort and distress, and potentially serious illness. So self-assessment is critical. But again, what the Para Athletes Commission doesn't try and do is specify what form that should take.
Yes.
It says one of the things you should consider doing is getting your members to do a self-assessment. The form of that self-assessment, the club's best place to decide, not the IDBF. The club is best placed to decide, given their knowledge of individuals, their knowledge of the local environment, their knowledge of local regulations, and so on. They're best placed to do it. What the document does say is that a risk assessment must be carried out. You've got to do a risk assessment, and you've got to document it, because at the end of the day, if something does go wrong, at least you're able to demonstrate that you tried your best to explore the potential risks and mitigate them.
I thought what was great about it is I appreciate you're not going to have a tick list. Well, you might do. You might be your option. But I like the idea of it's actually a function of team building and teamwork, that you're asking people to be responsible, be respectful for their teammates, and all the things that go into making a good team. And it might mean they don't turn up to training. So it's a bit of a dichotomy, if you like. But we've had it in the past. But, you know, I'm running a session at 6:30 in the morning. I get a phone call 6:15 saying, I'm not turning up today because I don't feel too well. I don't want to compromise the team. I'm thinking, thank you very much. Okay, I can go out in a single boat. No problem at all. But I thought that respect for the team actually is going into building the team. And I think it's great. I think it's great.
And I would, that sort of behavior is to be encouraged. People who pull out at the last moment for genuine reasons associated with coronavirus, as opposed to a double, you know, they've got a better offer from somebody. But if it's related to their concerns about coronavirus, they should be applauded. And what the clubs need to think about is, how do you engage with people who are currently in isolation for whatever reason?
Yeah.
You know, we've got to stay connected with our members, even if they're unable to actually participate in any form of paddling activity.
Okay, absolutely brilliant. 17 minutes, excellent. Concluding comments. I saw that. Don't be afraid to return to training, but be responsible. Bit of leadership. Take responsibility for your people. Be respectful of people. I think it's great. Any concluding comments from you, my friend?
Yeah. What I would say is that the document was written for the Para-Dragon community.
Yeah.
It has applicability across the board, but what we have tried to focus on are some of the difficulties and challenges that clubs who have Para-Dragon members will face, and give them some suggestions about how to deal with them. Brilliant. And that's what the document sets out to do, is to provide a mechanism for clubs to consider how to get their Para-Dragons back on the water. Excellent. Nigel, always a pleasure talking to you, my friend. Thank you very much. Hang on there. Hang on there.